The Zareth fleet arrived in silence, their ships hidden behind a shimmering cloak that bent light and masked their approach. From orbit, Earth seemed tranquil. Blue oceans cradling green and brown continents, dotted with the faint glimmers of artificial light. It was an image of serenity, one the Zareth had seen countless times before on worlds they had harvested. To them, Earth was no different. Another planet, another population to subdue and consume. Commander Raltak observed the holographic display of Earth's surface with the dispassionate focus of a predator studying its meal. His gray, segmented armor gleamed under the sterile light of the command chamber, and his sharp, angular features betrayed no doubt. "Unremarkable," he declared, his voice resonating through the chamber. "Their structures are primitive, their movements slow. They lack natural defenses or the cunning of true prey. This will be efficient." KLYR, the fleet's chief scientist, stood nearby, her slender form draped in a shimmering exosuit that pulsed faintly with neural currents. She tilted her head, scrutinizing the same display. A busy human market filled the projection, teeming with life. Vendors shouted. Children darted between stalls, and vehicles hummed in the background. To KLYR's analytical mind, the humans did not seem as simple as Raltak claimed. "They are peculiar," she murmured. "No claws, no fangs, no overt physical advantages. Yet they dominate this world. How?" Through luck and crude ingenuity, Raltak replied dismissively. "We've seen this before. Tools make them dependent, fragile. Break their tools, and they will crumble." KLYR remained unconvinced, but she said nothing. The Zareth did not tolerate dissent, especially from a scientist. Still, unease prickled at the edges of her thoughts as Raltak issued the command to begin the operation. The first raid targeted a small village tucked away in a quiet valley, far from the cities that stretched across the horizon. The Zareth preferred such isolated settlements for their initial strikes. Low resistance, minimal complications, a controlled environment to evaluate the new prey. 6 warriors descended, their imposing forms towering over the humans they sought to capture. At first, the plan unfolded flawlessly. The humans reacted as anticipated. Screams, disorganized panic, and a desperate scramble to escape. Zareth warriors moved methodically, corralling the fleeing villagers and stunning them with their paralyzing beams. But then, something unexpected happened. An elderly man, his weathered hands gripping a thick wooden staff, stood his ground as a warrior approached. His face was grim, his posture unwavering. The Zareth soldier hesitated, not out of fear but confusion. Prey was not supposed to resist. The man struck first, swinging the staff with surprising force. It cracked against the warrior's armor, an act of defiance rather than damage. Still, it was enough to cause a ripple of uncertainty. Nearby, a young woman armed with a hunting bow loosed an arrow, the steel-tipped shaft piercing a vulnerable joint in the same soldier's armor. The warrior stumbled back, a guttural roar tearing through the night. The villagers, emboldened by the sight, began to fight back. From the command ship, Raltak's eyes narrowed as the scene unfolded on the display. "What is this?" he growled. "Resistance," KLYR answered, her voice low. "They're unarmed primitives. This is chaos, not strategy," Raltak snapped. But even as he spoke, the humans' actions told a different story. The villagers moved with a strange cohesion, using their intimate knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. Fires were lit to obscure visibility. Heavy carts were overturned to block paths. Groups of humans attacked from the shadows, wielding tools and makeshift weapons with terrifying precision. One warrior fell, then another. The humans didn't overpower them through brute strength. They dismantled them piece by piece, exploiting weaknesses in their armor, swarming them in coordinated strikes. It wasn't chaos. It was survival, honed into an art form. Raltak's fist clenched. "Withdraw the team," he ordered. "This is a waste of resources." When the surviving warriors returned to the ship, their battered forms told a story of humiliation. The command chamber was silent as they filed in, the acrid scent of singed armor lingering in the air. Raltak's cold gaze swept over them, his anger palpable. "They fought like cornered animals," one warrior muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. "But they weren't animals." Raltak dismissed the comment, turning to KLYR. "Analyze the footage. Find their weaknesses. This planet will fall like all the others." But KLYR remained silent, replaying the raid's events in her mind. The humans' eyes haunted her. The fire within them. The way they moved not out of fear but with purpose. There was something primal, something predatory in their defiance. Far below, in the smoldering ruins of the village, the survivors began to regroup. The elderly man leaned on his staff, blood staining his brow. The young woman with the bow approached, her hands trembling but her gaze steady. "They'll come back," she said softly. "Let them," the man replied. "We'll be ready." In the sky above, the Zareth fleet hovered like a storm cloud on the edge of breaking, unaware that they had misjudged their prey. For the humans, this was not the end of the conflict. It was the beginning of the hunt. The Zareth command chamber hummed with activity as scientists and strategists pored over the data from the failed raid. Holograms flickered above the central console, replaying the humans' unexpected resistance. Despite their crude tools and lack of coordination by Zareth standards, they had fought with a ferocity that unsettled even the most seasoned warriors. KLYR stood at the heart of the chaos, her luminous eyes fixed on a looping segment of footage. In the clip, a young human man dragged an injured comrade from the fray, shielding them with his own body as villagers attacked from every angle. There was something haunting in his expression, not fear but determination. "They're not fighting for survival alone," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "They're fighting for each other." Raltak, seated in his elevated command throne, scoffed. "Sentimentality. A weakness we can exploit." KLYR turned, her posture rigid. "With respect, Commander, that sentimentality is what allowed them to repel us. They don't fight as individuals. They fight as a collective, a pack. They're far more dangerous than we anticipated." Raltak's eyes narrowed. "Enough. We've subdued creatures 10 times their size and intellect. These humans are no different." He gestured to the gathered strategists. "KLYR, analyze their physiology and behavior. Find the flaw that ensures their destruction. The rest of you, prepare for a full-scale assault." Hours later, KLYR sat in the quiet of her private laboratory, sifting through intercepted broadcasts and historical archives. Earth's electromagnetic signals carried a wealth of information, too much for the Zareth to fully process in the short time they had been observing the planet. KLYR, however, had developed a knack for focusing on patterns, extracting meaning from the chaos. What she found only deepened her unease. One broadcast showed humans on battlefields, their bodies battered and broken, yet still charging toward enemy lines. Another detailed the development of weapons so destructive they scarred the planet itself. Nuclear firestorms, chemical horrors, machines designed to annihilate thousands in moments. But it wasn't the weapons that disturbed her most. It was the humans themselves. Over and over, she saw them adapt to impossible circumstances, their ingenuity and determination overcoming insurmountable odds. They didn't just survive adversity, they thrived in it. KLYR leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The Zareth had faced many prey species, each one unique, but all ultimately predictable. Yet humanity defied every expectation. They weren't the strongest, the fastest, or the most intelligent. They were something else entirely. The next experiment was designed to confirm humanity's nature. A Zereth scouting team released a pack of zealots, vicious predators from the Zereth homeworld, into a rural human settlement. The zealots, with their razor-sharp claws and unparalleled hunting instincts, were apex predators in every sense of the term. The Zereth expected the humans to flee, scattering in disarray and leaving behind an easy meal. But once again, humanity defied expectation. From their vantage point above the settlement, Kael-Wyar and Raltak watched as the zealots stalked through the village, their hulking forms blending seamlessly with the shadows. A single scream pierced the silence as one of the creatures struck, its prey dragged into the darkness. The humans' response was immediate. Instead of fleeing, they rallied, armed with whatever tools they could find, axes, farming implements, even burning torches. A group of them moved to higher ground, laying traps along the narrow paths that led to their position. Another group lured the zealots into an open area, where villagers surrounded the creatures and attacked with coordinated ferocity. Kael-Wyar's breath caught as she observed the battle unfold. The humans moved with a terrifying combination of strategy and raw instinct. They didn't rely on brute force, but on cleverness, exploiting the zealots' reliance on stealth and surprise. It's as if they've faced creatures like this before, Kael-Wyar murmured. They have, Raltak said grimly. He gestured to the display. Their history is littered with it. They've hunted and been hunted since their inception. Their entire existence is a war for survival. As the last zealot fell, its massive form collapsing into a heap, the humans stood victorious. Their faces were bloodied, their hands trembling from exertion, but their eyes gleamed with triumph. Raltak's jaw tightened. This is unacceptable, he growled. They are prey. Nothing more. They're not prey. Kael-Wyar said, her voice firm. She turned to face him fully, her expression uncharacteristically defiant. They're predators. Apex predators. Raltak met her gaze, his features cold. Then we will remind them what it means to face a superior force. But Kael-Wyar couldn't shake the gnawing doubt in her mind. Every Zereth assumption about humanity had been wrong so far. If they continued down this path, they might not just lose the battle. They might awaken a threat that would consume them all. Below, in the village, the survivors began to regroup, their focus shifting from relief to preparation. A young man, his hands still smeared with the blood of the zealots, turned to the others and spoke with quiet resolve. They'll come again, he said, but next time we'll be ready. Above, the Zereth fleet loomed like a gathering storm, their plans for conquest already taking shape. But in their arrogance, they failed to see the truth. The humans were no longer prey. They had become the hunters. The Zereth fleet descended from orbit like a tidal wave, their ships blotting out the sky with a metallic sheen. Columns of soldiers marched through the atmosphere on anti-gravity platforms, their weapons calibrated to annihilate anything in their path. From his command throne, Commander Raltak watched the spectacle, his cold gaze scanning the battlefield. This time, there would be no underestimation, no mistakes. Deploy the shock troops first, he ordered, his voice sharp. We will crush their resistance before it can take root. Kael-Wyar stood at his side, her expression unreadable. She had spent the last hours combing through human data, and the same conclusion had haunted her every analysis. Humanity would not submit. They weren't just survivors. They thrived in opposition. Yet she remained silent, her warnings dismissed too many times. Below, the battle had already begun. Human settlements across the continent were ablaze, their inhabitants fleeing into dense forests, abandoned warehouses, or hastily constructed bunkers. Yet for every human who fled, another stayed to fight. These weren't soldiers, at least not in the traditional sense, but farmers, laborers, and engineers who had turned their homes into fortresses. In one besieged city, A young woman named Elena crouched behind the crumbled remains of a brick wall, her breathing ragged. She gripped a scavenged plasma rifle. It stocked too large for her frame, but steady in her hands. Around her, the makeshift resistance waited in tense silence. "Elena!" A man whispered from her right, his voice low but steady. It was Marcus, a former mechanic who had become their de facto leader. "Remember, we're not trying to win. We're trying to draw them in. Give the others time to move into position." She nodded, her jaw set. The Zareth had already taken too much. Her family, her home, her future. If she had to give her life to protect what was left, she would. A low hum signaled the approach of the Zareth. Their armored forms glided into view, weapons glowing with lethal energy. For a moment, the humans froze, the sheer size and menace of the invaders pressing down on them like a physical weight. Then Marcus gave the signal. Explosions tore through the air as hidden mines detonated, ripping through the Zareth ranks. The aliens staggered, momentarily disoriented, and that was all the opening the humans needed. They poured from their cover, weapons blazing, targeting the exposed joints and sensory modules of the Zareth armor. Elena fired, her aim precise. A Zareth soldier fell, its weapon clattering to the ground. Another turned toward her, but before it could fire, Marcus struck from the side, wielding a modified welding tool that sliced through its armor. From above, Raltak watched the chaos with a growing sense of unease. "They fight like cornered beasts," he muttered. "They fight like strategists," Kale Wyar corrected, her voice cold. She gestured to the display. "Look, they're not trying to overpower us. They're dividing our forces, forcing us into traps. Every move they make is calculated." Raltak clenched his fists. "Then we will escalate." He turned to his officers. "Deploy the suppression fields. Let's see how they fare without their crude weapons." On the ground, Elena's rifle sputtered and died, its energy drained by the Zareth suppression field. Around her, other human weapons failed, the sudden silence broken only by the advancing hum of the Zareth troops. Panic rippled through the resistance. Marcus cursed under his breath, his mind racing for alternatives. "Fall back," he shouted. "Regroup at the second line." But Elena didn't move. Her eyes flicked to the backpack she had placed behind her earlier. A jury-rigged explosive device packed with shrapnel and powered by a salvaged Zareth core. "Go," she said, her voice steady. Marcus froze. "Elena, go," she snapped, her gaze fierce. "I'll hold them off." For a moment, Marcus hesitated. Then, with a grim nod, he turned and led the others away. As the Zareth soldiers closed in, Elena activated the device, the core humming ominously. She stood tall, defiance etched into every line of her face. "This is our planet," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet fury. "Not yours." The explosion that followed lit up the sky, a fiery testament to humanity's refusal to bow. In the command chamber, the blast registered as a spike on the tactical display. Raltak's lips curled into a sneer. "Pointless," he said. "They throw their lives away for nothing." Kale Wyar didn't respond. She stared at the data, noting how the humans' scattered attacks were consolidating into a coordinated resistance. Each Zareth victory seemed to fuel the humans' resolve, turning every loss into a rallying cry. "They're adapting," she said quietly. Raltak turned to her, his expression dark. "Enough of your warnings. They are prey, and we will remind them of their place." But Kale Wyar's gaze remained fixed on the screen. She knew the truth the commander refused to see. Humanity was not prey. They were something far worse. In the smoldering ruins of the battlefield, survivors emerged, their faces streaked with soot and determination. Marcus stood at the edge of the blast zone, staring at the horizon where the Zareth ships loomed. They think they've won, he said softly. A young boy beside him asked, "What do we do now?" Marcus turned, his expression grim but resolute. "We make them regret ever coming here." Above, the Zareth fleet hovered like a storm cloud, unaware that the tide of battle had already begun to shift. Humanity's true nature had been unleashed, and the hunters were now the hunted.